allow me to tell you a story. There have been many multiplayer games that I have dabbled with throughout the years, many of which I have already shown on this channel, from the horrifying trials of Dead by Daylight to the comedic antics of Repo. But of all of them, none have had quite as big of an impact on my life as League of Legends. In case you were lucky enough to be unaware, this multiplayer online battle arena has been a massive time sink for me for over the past decade, with an insane amount of characters to play, all of which have interesting and unique stories. Well, most of them. Though over the past few years, the experience with the series has been a bit of a roller coaster. We've had such highs as amazing stories and cinematics, new game modes like Arena, Swarm, and Brawl freshening up the game, and we even got to see the universe expanded with things like Legends of Runeterra and Arcane. But in recent years especially, things have been really bleak, with several retcons that have made the series worse, the attempted removal of free-player progression, mass layoffs, especially in the art and lore departments, and increasingly predatory monetization that culminated in a $500 Ari skin and $200 gacha skins that Riot is content with because for some reason people are buying it.
That was really bad.
This past year especially has felt pretty dire for the game, to be honest. And yet despite that, I still hold the series close to my heart because it's how I met all of my close friends, and without them I wouldn't be who I am today. So you know what? If this series is potentially going up in flames, I might as well knock something out that I've been wanting to do since I've started this game. I joined back in 2015, but 2 years prior, I was fully introduced to the series through the Green Scorpions Top 15 League of Legends Champions. It's still a video I love watching despite its age, and it made me want to do my own list as well, so I think it's finally time to do it. As of recording this, there are 169 champions in the game, with Mel being the most recent release, and it's naturally going to be hard to quantify why certain champions get over certain other champions, but I'll do my best. So, with all that finally out of the way, welcome to Summoner's Rift. These are my top 15 favorite League of Legends champions. Picking number 15 was probably the hardest choice I had to make on this list. You may think it'd be harder to figure out what my top choices are, but I already know who I really like, and it mostly came down to just choosing the order. But trying to figure out who my 15th favorite champion is, while also figuring out why they managed to get on this list over ones who didn't, and why they weren't any higher, yeah, that's definitely a lot harder than trying to figure out what I already know. And while there are several other characters I still could have gone with, I ultimately went with the champion that I found myself considering for the spot the most.
There is no antidote for me.
Though if I'm being completely honest, this is still probably a bit of a weird choice. While still being a champion that I really like, I feel I have more issues with Cassiopeia compared to a lot of other champions on the list, mainly in her design and lore. Her design is mostly fine, being a traditional Naga with some Shuriman influence, which does make sense given that she spent most of her time there, but she's supposed to be Noxian and part of the Black Rose, and yeah, I'm sorry, that just does not come through with her design. I think it's mostly the lack of blacks and reds, given that's the color scheme for Noxus. And this is even after her design got updated, though I guess that was before Noxus's visual theme was decided on. This is also mixed with a bit of confusing lore, where she's hiding out in Noxus because people view her as a monster? Like, okay, sure, she was cursed in Shurima, so this isn't a normal appearance, but dude, you're in Noxus, the place with demons, minotaurs, and God knows what else. I think a snake lady is the last thing people would be bothered by. It just feels like a weird disconnect between how her story is written and how the world should be set up. Hell, this is especially confusing because shouldn't the Black Rose be interested in her power? Like, if they're working with Elise, who is literally working with a fucking spider god, you'd think they would give a shit about Cassiopeia having weird snake powers, right? That being said, I really like her gameplay. Being our first mid lane mage, Cassiopeia falls into the category of a hyper carry, which is basically a fancy way of saying if you give her an inch, she will take the entire mile. Her main game plan revolves around her E, Twin Fang, a point-and-click ability that deals not great damage on its own, but it's extremely spammable and is empowered when striking a poisoned target, dealing more damage and healing her in the process. Because of how fast she can output this can allow Cassiopeia to shred her opponents, provided she is willing to murder her E key. Both her Q and W apply poisons to the opponent, but they also have their own unique benefits. Q has poison that lingers on them after their hit, and it gives Cassiopeia a movement speed buff, while her W leaves a puddle of miasma, which only poisons people who stand on top of it, but it has the benefit of grounding them, preventing them from using any movement abilities. W is mainly used as the offensive option in case someone tries to get on top of you, but it can also be used to trap someone who's trying to flee away from you, while Q is mainly used to set up your E's bonus, though it's also really good at harass on its own. Like if you're not able to safely use your E in fights or in lane, you can very easily put points into your Q and then use it to just harass your opponent out. Especially since not only will you have the movement speed to get away from them, but the poison also applies the effects of items such as Liandry's Torment and Blackfire Torch. And speaking of items, that's another really big benefit Cassiopeia has over other champions. Cassiopeia can comfortably buy 6 items. Usually champion builds will have 5 main items, as well as a set of boots so they can move faster, but thanks to Cassiopeia's passive Slither, which I refuse to call Serpentine Grace, Cassiopeia naturally gains movement speed with her levels at the cost of not being able to buy shoes. While this sounds like a problem early, and we do lose the bit where she wore it as a hat, the movement speed she gets from her passive outclasses the boots later in the game, and it frees up her last item slot, allowing her to get more damage. Yeah, people can sell their boots later in the game, but that will cause them to suffer a loss in movement speed, while Cassiopeia doesn't suffer from anything. Top this off with her ultimate, which can damage and stun enemies who look at her, and you have a champion that can easily run down the enemy if they're given a chance. The only downside for her gameplay wise is that she is extremely mana hungry early, so you're desperately going to want to get a tier of the goddess as soon as possible. And the fact that a lot of her stuff, both items and ability wise, are very late game focused, this opens her up to being shut down very early, which can ultimately result in her being fucking dead weight.
That bastard called me dead weight!
She can theoretically have some utility in fights thanks to her ultimate, but the requirement of needing the target to face her is enough to make that an invalid point. If Cassiopeia had better lore and a better design, she might have been higher on this list, or at the very least, I would be more comfortable saying she is number 15. It's not like she's a flawed concept, there's been plenty of redesigns that have done wonders for her character, and she's still one I do really like. I just see the potential for her to be something even more than what she currently is. Let's just hope that Riot is able to tap into that potential when they eventually rework her, you know, in like 10 years. So, a good chunk of characters are on here because I enjoy their gameplay, which makes sense. I can appreciate some characters having amazing lore or sick-ass designs, but if I don't enjoy playing them in the online battle Vibio game, it's gonna be a bit of an issue. But for number 14, he's mainly here because I love this kind of character. Look at this slimy fuck! This slippery son of a bitch is Fizz, the title trickster, and I love him! Of all the regions in the game, I'd say the 2 that are probably my favorites are Banal City and Bilgewater. I think pirates and sea monsters are really cool, and I love the whimsical fantasy aesthetic that comes with the Yordles. And it just so happens that Fizz connects these 2 regions together, being an ancient aquatic Yordle whose entire species just fucking disappeared suddenly, and he fell into a coma because of a lack of social interaction. Wow, that's kinda fucked up. I actually don't know why Fizz has such a tragic backstory, because the main enjoyment from Fizz as a character is that he's just an annoying little fucker. Little shit-eating gremlins are probably one of my favorite character archetypes to exist, because they're just so enjoyable to see causing all sorts of mayhem and chaos, and Fizz is no exception. This is especially the case with his LOR appearance, where he has such amazing voice lines.
I take no pleasure in fighting a child.
Me neither. I'm like at least twice your age.
You best keep your distance, Fizz.
But it looks like you could use a hug. Hey, Rusty! Gonna try to kill me again?
I hate you.
And surprisingly, this vibe of being an annoying little shit carries over perfectly to his gameplay. Urchin Strike has Fizz dash in and dash out of battle, applying any on-hit effects he has with it, and his W passively applies an on-hit bleed, which when activated, deals extra damage on hit. This allows Fizz to apply some annoying damage over time just by poking them and dashing away like the slippery fish you are. Plus, the damage over time being counted as a spell allows it to trigger stuff like Blackfire Torch, which applies its own damage over time. It also resets and refunds its cooldown and cost if it kills something, and if it doesn't, it applies a weaker on hit for a couple of seconds, making his trades even more annoying. and if they want some of that fish, you can just toss them some with your ultimate, though they might be getting more than they bargained for. It's also funny thinking about how Fizz likely does this to people in Bilgewater. Like imagine you're just fishing and then suddenly you get hit by a flying fish. Plus the size and damage of Longtooth, that's the name of Fizz's shark, increases based on how far you throw it, meaning getting a sick long shot rewards you with even more damage and the potential ability to hit their teammates. But let's be real. We all know this isn't where the real menace of Fizz comes from. That would be his E, Playful Trickster. Upon casting it, Fizz hops up onto his trident and becomes completely untargetable. Sure, he still gets hit by damage over times and tethers, but everything else? Nope. Skill shots? Auto attacks? Fucking Torf's ult? Nothing can touch this little gremlin while he's up on his pole. You can also recast it to jump down and deal damage to enemies, but if he waits a couple seconds, it hits in a larger area and even slows enemies it hits. This one ability is your bread and butter and every other condiment on the sandwich. It deals a chunk of your damage, allows you to avoid damage, it catches up to fleeing enemies, it's great to disengage after poking, it goes over walls, and it's just really fun to use. With all these positives, it's gotta make you wonder why I said Fizz was only here mainly because of his character if he has such fun gameplay. And that's because I don't like playing assassins. I find most of them not fun to play, and consider them to be especially infuriating to play against. And this can sometimes be the case for Fizz as well, especially when Storm Surge was super broken. Not to mention Fizz also has one of the worst passives in the entire game. Granted, Fizz is hands down my favorite assassin to play, and I even went out of my way to get Mastery Rank 7 on him in the old system, which was a fucking pain in the ass. But because of my issues with assassins, I find myself struggling to really want to actively play Fizz. And sometimes you just end up in a match where it's hard to actually do your assassin things and it just feels fucking miserable. However, he'll still always remain as one of my favorites for his character alone, just as long as Riot doesn't fuck it up somehow. If Riot wasn't shitting the bed with reworks, we'd probably have this one by now. There have been a couple of champions that have been reworked since I started planning this list, more on that later, but Shyvana is one of those cases where one of my already existing favorites was about to receive a rework, before Riot iceboxed it, and while there are things I want to see improved, such as the design, which based on the concept art definitely is improving, she is still in my top 15, so there's certainly stuff I do like about her, such as her lore, though she is one of those champions that went through some unnecessary lore changes, such as changing her dad from being an actual father to just some guy who stole her egg, then got fucking melted. Now I understand that Riot made the decision to change her lore to better fit into the world of Runeterra, however, as I think those changes are fucking stupid, I will be ignoring them. So Shyvana's better lore is that she is a half-dragon, born after a mage attempted to steal magic from her egg and inadvertently infused it with some of his own. Shyvana's mother, disgusted by what she was, attempted to murder her before Shyvana's father stepped in, helping her escape and raising her, though he would eventually die at the hands of her mother. She would live on her own until a fateful encounter with an injured Prince Jarvan IV, where she would then help nurse him back to health. Eventually Shyvana's mother caught up with her again, but with the help of Jarvan and nearby villagers, they managed to overpower her, with Shyvana ultimately slaying her. With Shyvana's past now slain and Jarvan indebted to her, he allowed a place for her in the ranks of Demacia as his right-hand dragon. The two would even start to form a romance, though that was shattered during the Mage Rebellion, which saw the King Jarvan III killed, and the young prince swearing vengeance on mages. This naturally made Shyvana really uncomfortable given that she was a magical being, and led to her leaving Jarvan and Demacia despite him promising she would be safe. She wasn't taking any part of that hypocrisy. There's also the events of Ruination, which are a bit messy to talk about since we don't know what's fully canon, but in my personal opinion, I think this could be an interesting point to advance her story. Some of the concept art we have depicts a more feral Shyvana, who is more influenced by her dragon blood. So having those instincts amplified as a result of Viego's possession, similar to Atreus losing the powers of Pantheon, would be an interesting direction to take her story. As for her gameplay, Shyvana is our first jungler, and falls into the very niche category of a farming jungler. Basically, these junglers tend to focus on farming whenever they can, in order to reach a powerful power spike, usually level 6, before having some truly influential ganks. For Shyvana, this is because of her ultimate Dragon's Descent, which has Shyvana leap forward and transform into her dragon form, knocking back and damaging any enemies in her path. This is already a strong engage tool, but the more important thing is it empowers all of her basic abilities similar to Karma's mantra, and these buffs can be insanely good. As for said basic abilities, Twin Bite has Shyvana strike an enemy with a fierce auto attack, dealing extra damage and applying on-hit effects twice, and reduces its own cooldown by half a second every time you auto attack something. While empowered, it now deals damage in an area around the primary target, though the second hit doesn't apply on-hit effects for some reason. Burnout, aside from being a depressingly relatable name, creates a ring of fire around Shyvana and gives her additional movement speed, burning nearby enemies. Her auto attacks now also deal on-hit damage and extend the duration of Burnout, making a combo with Twin Bite. The dragon form of Burnout is simply bigger, kinda boring, but Fire Breath is where things get fun. In her human form, rather than breathing fire, she fires a Hadoken that deals damage and marks enemies. Attacks against marked enemies deal damage on hit, which once again pairs very well with Twin Bite. But the real fun comes with the dragon form. Instead of a simple fireball, she hurls a giant blast that explodes on contact, scorching the earth beneath them and burning them over time while also applying the mark. This ability is the centerpiece of AP Shyvana, where you just press E and fucking obliterate anyone who gets hit. Plus, even in the fighter builds, the on-hit max health damage can allow her to shred through tanks or bruisers. Plus, in fighter builds, she's just naturally able to do more while it's on cooldown, which admittedly is part of the reason why she ended up being so low. I like her AP build, but she's so reliant on E that it makes it feel weak without buying something like Nashor's Tooth, and even then building that takes away from your burst. And while fighter doesn't rely on that, it's prone to being kited and controlled like other fighters, even with her massive engagement tool. And when she doesn't have her ult, she feels extremely underpowered, which is probably why junglers that play her tend to rush getting level 6. Not to mention her passive is lame. You deal extra damage to dragons and gain bonus defensive stats per dragon soul. Yippee. It has some different functions in the other game modes, but I do wish she naturally kept the ARAM buff, where she also gains bonus fury generation. Anything to keep the dragon form up. And speaking of dragon form,
Oh my goodness!
yeah, Shyvana's model has aged extremely poorly. Legends of Runeterra does make it look a bit better, but in League, it's rough. She looks malnourished and like she's gonna snap. These factors were enough to bump her down a few more slots than I was originally planning, but it's not enough to take her off the list. Maybe she'll be able to rise back up once the rework comes out, you know, in 50 years. Never have any expectations of it, then you won't be disappointed. Let's continue on the subject of reworks for a moment, because it's kind of important for this one. While most people think they're a modern thing, reworks aren't actually anything new. Since the game's inception, there have been a ton of changes which can be classified as reworks, but the kind we know of nowadays started around 2013, with the full relaunch of Karma, which was considered such a big deal at the time that they gave her a skin to represent her past self. They would then do this 2 more times, with the launch of Lissandra going along with 2 more major updates. One was for a champion being moved to a new region with a completely new backstory, and the other one was because she needed some clothes. Life in the Freljord is harsh. Not only do you have to deal with the bitter cold, but also wolves and yetis and unknowable cosmic entities. Yeah, definitely a place you don't want to be caught without a shirt on. Okay, I guess some people can go shirtless, but that isn't the case for Sejuani, War Mother of the Winter's Claw, one of the 3 major factions in Freljord. She lives by the rule that only the strong can survive. After a life of hardship due to neglect from her mother and grandmother, Sejuani planned to overthrow them and become the new War Mother instead, raiding and destroying nearby tribes to rally others with her. She even managed to raid a Noxian warship and free a Druvast, who she would name Bristle and would serve as her noble steed. She eventually overthrew and killed her mother, and has taken the Winter's Claw from the brink of ruin to being one of the most feared tribes in the Freljord, though she would constantly get into feuds with her former battle sister Ashe. Currently she is leading a raid into Volibear's territory to claim an artifact he had stolen, so we'll see how that turns out eventually, maybe, probably not. As for her gameplay, Sejuani is a tank primarily played in the jungle. I guess it would be a good idea to mention that tanks tend to fall into one of 2 categories in League: Vanguards and Warden. Wardens are more defensive tanks, using their abilities to protect teammates and disengage enemy assassins. Vanguards, meanwhile, are the ones all about starting fights, throwing themselves into the enemy to try and lock down their carries. Sejuani naturally falls into the latter category, and has no issue throwing herself in thanks to her passive Frost Armor. After not taking damage for a bit, Sejuani covers herself in a protective layer of ice, and this ain't that normal frail bullshit ice like you see in Pokemon. This is the good shit. Crack up! While it's up, not only are you immune to slows, but you also gain a massive boost in armor and magic resist. This makes a lot of your bulk front-loaded, which is really good for engages, but more importantly, it also lets you take Honeydew without being slowed down. Arctic Assault has Bristle charge forward, stopping at the first enemy hit and knocking them up, which is how you'll typically engage fights. Sedge is also able to cast her other abilities during the dash, which can be really helpful with her W, where she swings her flail twice, first to the side and then straight ahead, with the second swing slowing the target. These swings also have damage scaling with your health, meaning that they'll be still doing some decent damage even if you're lacking damage items. This can already allow you to keep up in fights where Sejuani would normally be lacking damage and help in duels, but the real benefit comes from how it works with Permafrost. Once Sedge puts a point into her E, her W, and basic attacks from her and her allied melee champions apply stacks of Permafrost onto enemies. And once they get to 4, Sedge can use the ability to encase an enemy in ice, stunning and damaging them. And the ice isn't there just for thematic flair, it also plays into her second passive, Icebreaker. If Sejuani damages a frozen target, the ice shatters, and they take a chunk of magic damage. She can only apply frost to the same target every few seconds, so you don't have to worry about getting chain permafrost. But even still, getting hit by it once can be massively devastating, which can turn a fight greatly for Sejuani. You'll definitely be glad they're frozen in there while you're out here shattering their bones. Finally, there's her ultimate Glacial Prison, where Sedge throws her Bola, encasing the first enemy it hits. That can already be good, especially since it can bypass the downtime you normally take to freeze a target, meaning you can trigger Icebreaker twice. But that's not all. If the Bola travels far enough, it'll not only increase the damage and stun duration, but it'll also create a snowstorm, slowing all inside of it before detonating again to do damage. This obviously has the benefit of more damage, but it also encourages the player to use the ult as a way of engaging a fight, or as follow-up in case the enemy gets away, rather than simply just trying to stun lock your opponent. And honestly, that's really good game design. You can still do the standard stun lock, but you are rewarded more if you don't. And while I haven't mentioned it too much in the script, let's talk about Sejuani in Arena. Tanks are already pretty fun due to all of the amazing augments they have, such as Courage of the Colossus, Slow Cooker, and Heavy Hitter, but the real joy for Sejuani specifically comes in the prismatic items, specifically Force of Entropy and Cruelty. Cruelty makes a meteor crash down onto your opponent every time you CC them, and Force of Entropy makes it so that your CC has a chance to crit, extending its duration. It's not as OP as it seems due to the combo breaker mechanic, but honestly it doesn't matter, it's still fun as hell to lock someone into oblivion. She may not be my favorite champion to play in Arena, or really my favorite in any of her categories. Really, she's kind of just a jack of all trades and master of none, but she's still one I enjoy taking for a spin every now and again, and she easily earns her number 12 spot. Winter is coming to Runeterra. Are you strong enough to survive? So, I've been thinking about making this video since I think I started playing back in 2015. And while I'm happy I held off as now I can make the video actually good thanks to all the years of video experience, this has resulted in the list shifting a lot, with a ton of champions who would have made it onto the list completely falling off. However, in this case, we have a champion who would have been way higher in this list, ending up way lower than before. And by way higher, I mean she used to be number 2. Like Fizz, Poppy is a Yordle, though she never really fit in with the chaos that the rest of her kind was known for. Longing for a purpose in life, she traveled to the unclaimed west of Valoran, where she would meet a traveling caravan led by Orlan. Two would travel together and become close friends, and eventually they would end up founding the nation of Demacia. Unfortunately, Orlan was merely a human, and Poppy was a spirit with a long lifetime, and even if she did die, she would just respawn in Vandal City. So if you were sad about Heimerdinger dying in her game, don't worry, you didn't. Eventually, Orlan's time had come, and on his deathbed, he would give Poppy his Warhammer, and told her it was to be given to the hero of Demacia before he passed away. Poppy now spends her time looking for this hero to complete her friend's final wish, but never realized that she already has found them, as she is the hero he spoke of. Though if you ever suggested the idea to her, she would not take you seriously. This has led to some players finding Poppy rather annoying, like her outright refusing to consider the idea of even being a hero. When she's able to level a small army with a single swing is kinda ridiculous, but personally though, I never found myself bothered by it. Honestly, I think it's part of her charm, and even if I did find her a bit too humble, how could I be mad at someone who looks this adorable? It's honestly probably one of the best redesigns they've done for a rework. She fits perfectly into both Bandle City and Demacia. Definitely better than... Look, I get that they were going for a different character with Old Poppy, but she was just terrible. And yet, the new Poppy didn't lose the soul of the original design, which is something that can also be said about her gameplay. Now, Old Poppy had more problems than I could count, but I think it's generally a bad sign when the best way to play a tank was as an assassin. Personally, I was expecting them to go complete scorched earth on her gameplay and completely rework it from the ground up, getting rid of almost everything she had, but to my surprise, they kept almost everything intact, aside from her ultimate, which was pretty unhealthy for the game. Her old passive was made part of her W, and her Q and W were updated in ways that feel like the same abilities, while being completely different. Plus, she got a new passive and ultimate that felt way more in tune with how her gameplay was supposed to be. Really, the only thing that remained unchanged was her E, Heroic Charge, which, to be fair, was her best ability. But the press of a key, Poppy tackles an opponent, damaging and pushing them a short distance. If she and the target run into a wall along the way, Poppy will then stun the target for a few seconds. This is great for both getting enemies off of your allies, but also for engaging a fight, especially since it sets up for her Q. With a thrust of her hammer, Poppy wallops her target and creates a slowing zone for a second, which then erupts for more damage. Great for chunking enemies like your old Q, but now has the added utility of a slow and wave clear, making it even better for trading in lane. Steadfast Presence, in addition to passively increasing her armor and magic resist, doubled while on low health, can be activated to give Poppy a boost in movement speed for a few seconds. It may not seem all that impressive, but while she has this buff, she also creates an aura around her, interrupting and grounding anyone who tries to dash into it. While it doesn't stop blinks, it's fantastic to stop champions from dashing on top of your carry, or keeping someone from escaping you. You may have noticed a sort of repeating theme with her abilities. They're both good offensively, but they're also really good for defending her teammates. She can very easily engage a fight and lead a charge, but she can also ensure that her teams don't get absolutely obliterated. She can be as much of a vanguard as a warden, toss herself into the enemy lines and throw down as much as she wants, as well as appeal for your carry and keep them safe, which is extremely fun because it allows you to adapt based on how the game's going. And all of this is capped off by her ultimate, Keeper's Verdict. The ability has two types of attacks, depending on if you hold down the ability after casting it. If you just tap it, Poppy will swing her hammer forward and knock up whoever's in front of her, keeping them in place for a second. This is fantastic for chaining CC while beating down a villain, or keeping someone in place while you reposition to charge them into a wall, as well as, again, getting them off of your carry. But the real fun comes when you charge it. She instead creates a shockwave that stops at the first champion hit, and launches them off into the distance. They're sent back towards their nexus and are untargetable, so you can't lay on the hurt, but what this does is makes it a fantastic way to get the front line out of the way so your team can easily then rampage through their back line. It can also be used to peel an assassin off of your carry, knock an enemy carry out of a fight, or in the most funny thing, launch someone out of the circle in arena so they then get cooked alive. There are plenty of champions that can push people out of the ring in arena, but Poppy is probably one of the funniest. Easily one of my favorite abilities in the entire game. It's honestly kind of funny to think about. I haven't played Poppy as much as I used to, and for a while I wasn't even sure if she was gonna make it onto the list. But having replayed her because of how much fun she is in Arena, made me remember why she was a contender for one of my favorites all of those years ago. Sure, she didn't make it into the top half, the next 10 is some real tough competition. I do feel being 11 out of 169, and counting, is still a massive accomplishment, and she absolutely deserves the spot. She may not believe she is THE hero, but she certainly is one to us.